I'm here with Jasmine Tucker of the National Priorities Project. She's a research analyst over there, and we're going to talk about the House Republican budget and the Alternative Progressive Caucus People's Budget. Jasmine, first of all, I wanted you to give us an overview. What is the House Republican budget trying to do?
Thanks so much for having me, Isaiah. The House Republican budget is all about austerity. We're looking at $887 billion in discretionary spending cuts over 10 years as compared to current law. In addition, what we see is some language that's going to make additional mandatory spending cuts on top of those discretionary spending cuts, and that's going to be an additional $140 billion over 10 years. So we're seeing a lot of cuts for domestic programs. And meanwhile, we see some increases for Pentagon spending and lowering of tax rates for corporations and wealthy. So those three key things are really what the Republican budget is all about.
One of the things that distinguishes the people's budget from the House Republican budget is that the people's budget makes a very big bet on infrastructure spending, and the House Republican budget seems to do almost the opposite.
It does. It does. There's actually no new funding for job creation in the House budget. It does say that it's going to, cut spending and reduce tax rates, and that will somehow magically create some jobs. But there's not really a lot of detail on how that would work. We don't know what the new tax rates would be. We're talking about these big cuts to discretionary spending. But we don't know exactly how those cuts are going to play out. So, I mean, they're relying on some budget gimmicks to sort of get there and saying that there's going to be job creation. They don't provide any new funding to job training programs or anything like that. So we really don't know how this would play out in terms of job creation.
And what is astounding to me about that anyway is that you have a party that talks about things like requiring people who are receiving welfare benefits or the SNAP program, the food stamp program, to they're talking about increasing work requirements for those programs, as well as cutting the spending on those programs. But you're saying that on the other end, where they're requiring people to work, they're not creating or funding the programs that would help people get jobs.
Right. For these increased work requirements, people don't want to not work. So there's already a lot in place for folks to sort of move from programs into jobs or to simultaneously receive benefits while working. But the people who are really going to be hurt by some of these work requirements are people with really young children who can't afford to pay for childcare, outside of the home. They need to stay home with their children, and so it's not sort of clear how this is going to impact other populations as well. But you're hitting all the right points. If you're going to if you're going to implement these work requirements, you do have to kind of fund job retraining or job search functions, in unemployment insurance, and they're talking about cutting those benefits as well. Some of these mandatory cuts, see people lose their health insurance. They could, see loss of or reduction in their food stamp benefits. So it really does hit low income and moderate income families really hard.
In fact, one of the things that you said in your report was that there are $799 billion in safety net programs that are targeted for potential cuts. What is the impact of that going to be? I mean, you've already spelled some of it out, but let's go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so the House says that there's about $800 billion in sort of overlapping programs that help low to moderate income folks. So, food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, Medicaid, they're saying that if you're receiving all of these at once, then you're getting too much essentially. And so they're saying there's a lot of overlap in these programs. People are simultaneously receiving them, and they see that as a problem. So don't exactly know. There's not a lot of detail in this budget. They keep things conveniently vague about how they would go about deciding which programs have more quote fraud than others. But they do frame it as targeting waste, fraud, and abuse in these programs. Though we know that waste, fraud, and abuse in these programs is very low. Low to moderate income families do rely on these programs, and they need them. So, there's a lot of vagueness in this budget, unfortunately. So we don't know how this would play out. But we do know that it's going to really hit the lowest income families, because those are the folks who are receiving multiple benefits at one time.
And in fact, the numbers that I've seen lately in terms of people who are receiving these benefits, in terms of their income levels, their poverty levels, it is not as if these people are living high off the hog. They're not. It's not like the stereotype of people on benefits going to the checkout counter with steaks and lobster in their shopping cart. That's just not the norm.
You're exactly right. These programs are they're not lifting necessarily people out of poverty. They're sort of lowering the impact of poverty. Like the income tax credit and the child care tax credit. They don't always pull people over the line. They're just helping them get by. So definitely.
Now, one of the things you highlight is a potential cut in Social Security, which I found, and I think a lot of people would find alarming.
It is alarming. It is alarming. People across the spectrum, Americans, on the left, on the right, young, old, everyone loves Social Security, and everyone wants to make sure that Social Security is going to be around for future generations. This budget, we're talking about these mandatory spending cuts. The number that they're throwing out there is $30 billion over 2 years. But the changes that they're making are actually going to be permanent changes. So it's not just $30 billion over 2 years. It's $140 billion over 10 years, and even more, in the long term. We're talking about permanent changes to mandatory spending programs. So we don't know how much of that would be Social Security. We don't know how much would be Medicare. We don't know how much would be Medicare food stamps. But there is that legislative language in there that says that separate legislation needs to come up if they pass this budget resolution that does tackle some cuts in mandatory spending programs. And Social Security benefits are incredibly modest. As you mentioned, people are not going to buy lobster with their Social Security benefits. They're paying their rent, they're paying their heat, they're keeping food on the table. People do rely on those benefits about $1,000 a month, right? So how much are you really, how much lobster are you buying? How much is the answer.
And one idea which keeps coming back in these House Republican budgets is the idea of privatizing Medicare. You highlight that as well. So what's the danger there?
The danger there is that Medicare is a social insurance program just like Social Security. We're paying into it out of our FICA taxes every month. And we should be able to expect those benefits when we retire. So, the House Republicans really need to be considering ways to strengthen Social Security and Medicare, determining how we can improve benefits, which are incredibly modest, into the future. When we're talking about privatizing these programs, we're chipping away at, their credibility, and that's incredibly problematic. Social Security and Medicare have been around for 80 years, and they've never, Social Security in particular has never missed a payment. So, you know, we need to make sure that these programs are going to stick around. Um, the House Congressional Progressive Caucus budget, it supports improving benefits for Social Security. It wants to keep Medicare around. So those are the proposals that we need to be thinking about. Those that are going to strengthen these social insurance programs that millions of Americans rely on every day.
Let's talk about the people's budget for a second, because it's a $4.4 trillion budget for fiscal year 2017. Is it in your view, because you've looked at budgets for years, is it in your view a practical budget?
It is. It's incredibly practical. This budget it pays for itself, right? Like it's not just creating $4.4 trillion out of thin air and adding to the debt. It's raising a ton of money. It's going to ask corporations and the wealthy to pay a lot more, to pay their fair share for the federal budget, which they're not currently doing. It's going to close a variety of tax loopholes and really step up revenues. So that's how they're going to pay for some of the funding that they're looking at. And we really need domestic investment. There's still too many people looking for jobs. There's still a lot of crumbling infrastructure. I mean, we don't want another Flint to happen, and we need to step up funding, to make sure that pipelines are safe. There's lots of things that we need to be doing, and this budget really make an investment that that our future really does need in education, infrastructure, and jobs. There's a lot to really like about this budget. And another thing that I want to mention is that on the non-domestic side, on the defense side, the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget wants to shut down the Pentagon slush fund and end unsustainable and costly wars that have really eaten into our budget over the last 15 years. So that's another really key thing to really like about this budget. It is.
So how do you see the budget fight unfolding, and what should citizens be doing over the next couple of weeks?
Great question. So we know that the budget vote on the House resolution is postponed until after lawmakers come back from Easter recess, so the week of April 11th. And so any votes on any alternative budget, such as the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget, has to wait until then as well. It's looking that the House budget resolution is not going to be successful. They were originally supposed to release their proposal back in February. It was just released last week because they knew that folks on the far right, those in the Freedom Caucus, weren't really on board. So that's why they added that language about $30 billion over 2 years, or $140 billion in cuts to mandatory programs over 10 years. So now they're postponing the vote again, which was supposed to happen this week. So now is really a great time to let your congressperson know which budget you support. And in our analysis, we really found that when we matched up, what Americans want in each of these proposals, the Congressional Progressive Caucus budget was really the one that Americans would really like, according to voting. So now would be a really great time to get in touch with your member of Congress and let them know which proposal that you support and which one that they will vote for.
Want to thank you very much for the work that you do over the National Priorities Project.
Thanks so much for having me.